Chapter 1. The afternoon that slipped. Mary Benton had always believed loyalty was something you carried quietly. Like good posture. You didn't announce it. You didn't wave it around. You just stood in it naturally and trusted that everyone could tell. That afternoon, standing in her parents' backyard with a paper plate balanced on her palm, she would have told you, without hesitation, that she loved her husband completely. The house was full in that humming, overlapping way only family could manage. Uncles argued about grills. Aunts compared sun hats. Children wove through legs like migrating birds. Somewhere near the back fence, her father was holding court beside the smoker, speaking seriously about absolutely nothing. Mary's 5-year-old daughter, Ellie, darted past with a popsicle already melting down her wrist. "Mommy, Grandma says I can have another one because it's a special day." Mary smiled. "That sounds like a grandma decision." Ellie laughed and ran off before approval could be revoked. Mary shifted her weight and turned back to the people she'd been laughing with. Claire and Jenna from work, and Marcus, who stood just close enough to be familiar without ever quite stepping into personal space. She'd invited them because it felt natural. Because they'd become her lunch companions. Because being married with a child in an office where everyone else was single had begun to feel like a jacket she wore wrong somehow. Too formal, too serious. With them, she didn't have to explain herself. And then he actually said he was emotionally available. Jenna finished, rolling her eyes. "Oh no," Claire groaned. "That's code. That's always code." Mary laughed, a quick bark that surprised her with its volume. David stood near the picnic table a few yards away, talking with her cousin Mark. He looked relaxed, hands loose at his sides. He wore the old navy polo she liked, the one that made him look younger than 35. Mary glanced at him, not with concern, just inventory. Presence confirmed. "Fine." Marcus followed her gaze and smiled faintly. "Your husband seems steady," he said. Mary smiled back. "He is." Marcus nodded, then added lightly. "Must be nice, having someone so dependable. Some men really peak early." Mary laughed again. It felt reflexive, like keeping pace in a conversation without thinking about where it was going. David's shoulders stiffened just slightly. Claire leaned in. "Marcus is allergic to routine. It's tragic." "Hey, I like excitement," Marcus said. "I just think some people settle into roles." He lifted his beer in David's direction, voice carrying just enough. "Right, man?" David turned. He smiled politely. "If you like the role, it's not settling." Mary laughed. "Too fast, too loud." "Oh my God," she said, still smiling. "You too." Marcus grinned. "I mean, I admire it. I couldn't do the whole predictable life thing." Something tightened along David's jaw. Conversation resumed. Another joke landed. Another laugh from Mary. She didn't hear how her laughter sounded different. Less warm, more performative. She didn't notice that it never moved toward David, only away from him. Minutes stretched. In that quiet way of men who don't announce departures, David excused himself from Mark. He found Ellie sitting on a blanket with her grandmother, carefully lining up carrot sticks. "Hey, Bug," he said. "I've got to step out for a bit." Ellie frowned. "Why?" "Just need some air." "You stay with Grandma. Okay?" She nodded solemnly. "Okay. Can I have another popsicle later?" He smiled genuinely for the first time in 20 minutes. "Ask your mom." Mary didn't see him go. The laughter continued behind her. Marcus had launched into a story about a dating app disaster. "And then she says she needs a man with ambition," he said, mock serious. "Meanwhile, I'm thinking you're 34 and reviewing yoga studios on Yelp." Mary snorted. "That's not fair," Claire said. "Men do that too." Marcus shrugged. "Some of them do. The ones who've already given up." Mary laughed again. Then crack. The sound cut through the yard like a drop dish. Mary's face burned before she could understand why. Her mother stood in front of her, hands still trembling in the space between them, eyes blazing. "How dare you!" Silence swallowed the yard. Mary's ears rang. Before she could speak, her mother's voice rose. Not shrill, but sharp with control stretched thin. "How dare you bring people into my home and laugh with them while they disrespect your husband?" No one moved. Not a child. Not a cousin. Even the smoker seemed to stop breathing. Mary opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her mother stepped closer. "You think we didn't hear it? You think we didn't see him standing there while you laughed?" Mary shook her head. "Mom, he loved you enough not to make a scene," her mother said. "And you loved being liked more." Mary's heart dropped straight through her. Around her, faces blurred. Shame crept over her skin, hot and unrelenting. In her mind, she had been a good wife. A loyal one. Easygoing. Modern. She hadn't betrayed anyone. She just fit in. But now, through her mother's fury, she saw David's stillness. His politeness. His quiet leaving. She saw herself, not as she intended, but as she had appeared. Laughing. Agreeing. Complicit. Marcus cleared his throat. "I didn't mean." Her mother snapped her gaze toward him. "You should leave." Mary finally found her voice. Cracked. "David didn't say anything," she whispered. "No," her mother said softly now. "He didn't have to." Mary swallowed hard, grief blooming in her chest. Not for what she'd lost, but for how easily she'd traded it away. Somewhere beyond the fence, a car started and drove off. Chapter 2, The Quiet After. By the time the yard found its noise again, David was already gone in more ways than one. Mary stood near the patio door, hands pressed flat against her thighs, as family voices cautiously resumed around her. Not quite normal, not quite hushed. Someone cleared plates. Someone pretended nothing had happened by asking too loudly about dessert. Her mother turned away without another word. Mary felt suddenly young, shrunken inside the familiar geometry of her parents' house. The siding she'd scraped her knee against once. The screen door she'd slammed as a teenager. She had come here believing herself solid and grown, and somehow, in a single afternoon, she had been stripped down to a version of herself she didn't recognize. Claire lingered nearby, face tight with embarrassment. "We should, she said, gesturing vaguely. "We should probably go." Jenna nodded quickly. Marcus had already disappeared toward the driveway. "Mary," Claire added softer now. "I didn't think." "It's fine," Mary said automatically. The lie tasted metallic. They left. The gate clicked shut behind them with finality. Mary stayed until everyone else drifted toward pie and coffee, then slipped inside, climbed the stairs, and closed herself into her old bedroom. The posters were gone, replaced by a generic guest room comm. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. Her phone lay heavy in her lap. She texted first. "Did you leave?" 3 dots appeared, vanished, then appeared again. She held her breath. "Yes." She swallowed. "We need to talk." This time, the dots never came. David slept at his brother's place that night. Not out of anger. Anger would have burned hot and fast. This was colder. This was control. He lay on the pull-out couch staring at the ceiling fan, replaying the afternoon with merciless clarity. The jokes, the laughter, the way Mary's eyes hadn't found his when she laughed. He hadn't imagined it. That was the worst part. He loved her. He loved the life they'd built, the rhythms, the teamwork, the quiet pride of being chosen daily. But he had learned something long before Mary, something etched deep into him by men who bent themselves too far. Respect eroded quietly, if you let it. And he would not teach his daughter that love meant swallowing humiliation. His phone buzzed again. "Please call me." He stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hello." Mary exhaled audibly, relief and panic tangling together. "Thank you." Silence stretched. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "What was happening? I mean, I knew we were joking, but I didn't realize." "You did," David said calmly. The lack of heat in his voice frightened her more than yelling would have. "I didn't," she insisted, then faltered. "I mean, I didn't mean to." "I know." She closed her eyes. "Then why does this feel like I did something unforgivable?" "Because meaning isn't the same as impact," he replied. "And because you didn't stop." Her cheeks burned despite the miles between them. "I laughed," she whispered. "And I didn't even think about how it sounded." "No," David said. "You thought about how it would look if you didn't." That landed hard. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders folding inward. "I love you," she said, as if volume or repetition could fix something fractured. "I know," he said again. "But loving me isn't the issue." She squeezed the phone tighter. "Then what is?" "Whether you choose me," he said. "When it costs you something." Mary's chest tightened. "I've always chosen you." He was quiet long enough that she feared the call had dropped. "Today," he said at last, "you chose to be accepted." The words were gentle. The damage was not. Tears slid down her face silently. "I didn't see it. And that's the problem," David said. "I can't be married to someone who doesn't see me." Her breath hitched. "Are you leaving?" "No," he answered immediately. "But I'm not coming home tonight." She nodded even though he couldn't see it. "Ellie?" "She's fine," he said. "Your mom called." Mary winced. Of course she had. "I don't want this to be how you remember me," Mary said. "That version of me." "That version exists," David replied. "Pretending it doesn't won't help us." Pause. "What do you need?" she asked quietly. He considered the question seriously, which gave her a small, fragile hope. "I need to know," he said, "that your words will start matching your actions, and I need time to see it." Her throat tightened. "Okay. I'll come by tomorrow," he added. "To see Ellie. We can talk more then." "Okay." When the call ended, Mary sat very still, phone pressed to her chest. She felt flayed, exposed to herself in a way that hurt more than accusation ever could. The next morning, she noticed things she'd never noticed before. How often she softened her edges around certain people. How quickly she laughed before thinking. How instinctively she mirrored, rather than anchored. At breakfast, her mother busied herself aggressively with eggs. "I should apologize again," Mary said. Her mother didn't look at her. "Apologies aren't currency. They don't mean much without follow-through." Mary nodded. "I know." Her mother finally turned, eyes tired but less sharp than the day before. "Your father and I didn't raise you to disappear yourself." Mary flushed. I wasn't disappearing. You were, her mother said simply. From your husband. That afternoon, David came by for Ellie. He was polite, warm with their daughter, distant with Mary in a way that was careful rather than cruel. She watched him buckle Ellie into her seat, memorizing the ordinary intimacy of it, the way his hands moved, the way Ellie chattered. I'm proud of you, Ellie said suddenly. David smiled. For what? For not yelling, she said solemnly. Grandma said yelling makes things worse. Mary's heart squeezed. David closed the door and turned to her. We'll talk more soon, he said. But I need to see consistency. She nodded. You will. He studied her for a moment, searching. Not for promises, but for resolve. Then he drove away again. Mary went inside and stood at the kitchen counter, hands braced against the laminate. She pictured herself laughing the day before and finally understood what made it unbearable. She had liked that version of herself, and now she would have to unlearn her. Chapter 3, Seeing Patterns. Monday morning felt unfamiliar, like walking into a room she'd rearranged herself without permission. Mary sat at her desk with her coffee cooling untouched, watching the office wake up around her. The low hum of printers, the clack of keyboards, laughter that came too easily before 9. She noticed because now she was noticing how often she listened for it. Claire and Jenna arrived together, mid-conversation, jackets half off, energy bright and effortless. And I told him, if you're figuring yourself out at 37, that's a personal project, not a date plan, Jenna said. Claire laughed. Yes, exactly. They both turned toward Mary, waiting. There it was, the familiar beat, the cue. Mary felt it in her body first, the instinctive lift of her mouth, the small inhale that preceded a laugh she hadn't even decided to release yet. She stopped herself. Instead, she smiled, quieter, thoughtful. That sounds exhausting. It wasn't a joke. It was an observation. Claire blinked. Jenna tilted her head. The moment passed, slightly off kilter, like a step missed on a staircase. Well, Jenna said after a pause. Men. She walked on. Mary exhaled slowly. Shouldn't have felt brave. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't even controversial. But it felt like choosing herself after years of gentle erasure. She opened her email and began answering messages, attention drifting uncomfortably inward. She saw the pattern threaded through the morning. How often jokes were invitations. How often laughter was currency. How she'd used it without thinking, trading ease for alignment, warmth for belonging. Marcus arrived late, sunglasses still perched on his head like an accessory he hadn't earned. Morning, Benton, he said, leaning on the edge of her desk. Survived the weekend? Her spine straightened. She met his eyes calmly. It was complicated. Oof, he said lightly. Family? And friends, she replied. He chuckled. Yeah, well, they all mean well. She held his gaze. Intent doesn't erase impact. The words surprised her as much as him. Marcus straightened, smile flickering. Didn't realize you were carrying a philosophy minor now. I'm learning, she said evenly. Something cooled between them, not hostility exactly. Distance. Right, he said after a beat. Well, see you around. When he walked away, Mary felt the ghost of old reflexes tug at her. The urge to smooth, to joke, to reclaim the easy camaraderie before it slipped too far. She let it go. At lunch, the shift became more apparent. The group sat outside at their usual table, sun bouncing off cheap metal, conversations overlapping. Stories rose, fell, reassembled themselves. Mary listened more than she spoke. And then he said commitment freaked him out, Claire said. At his sister's wedding. Jenna groaned. Of course it did. Mary sipped her iced tea. Did you want commitment? She asked. Or did you want honesty? They both looked at her. Well, Claire said slowly. Both. Mary nodded. That makes sense. No punchline followed. No shared laugh. The space it left behind felt awkward but also real. You're quiet today, Jenna said finally. Mary didn't bristle. She'd prepared for this moment, even if she hadn't rehearsed the words. I think I got used to talking without thinking, she said. I'm trying something different. Claire studied her. Is this about what happened Saturday? A flare of nerves passed through Mary's chest. Yes, she said simply. Jenna shifted. Your mom was intense. She was right, Mary replied. Silence settled over the table. A breeze nudged napkins toward the edge. We didn't mean to disrespect David, Claire said carefully. I know, Mary said, but I didn't mean to let it happen either. And I did. Jenna frowned. So what? Now we have to watch everything we say? Mary shook her head. No, I do. That seemed to land differently. Claire leaned back. Okay, she said after a moment. That's fair. Lunch resumed, but it had changed shape. Less buoyant. More grounded. Mary walked back inside alone, oddly lighter. That evening, she made dinner without music. The silence felt instructional. Ellie sat at the counter coloring, feet swinging. Daddy coming home tonight? She asked. Not tonight, Mary said gently. But soon. Ellie nodded, accepting this with the elastic logic of children. Okay. Later, Mary folded laundry with deliberate care, pairing socks, smoothing creases. She imagined David watching, not suspiciously, not critically, but attentively, the way someone watches to see if a pattern holds. She wasn't doing this for performance. She reminded herself of that often. It had to be true when no one was looking. Her phone buzzed. How was work? David texted. She stared at the message, considering the easiest answer, the reassuring one. Instead, she typed, different, uncomfortable, necessary. Pause. Thank you for being honest, he replied. Her throat tightened, not with relief, but recognition. By Thursday, the shift had become unmistakable. Marcus avoided her unless necessary. When he did speak, he was clipped, surface polite. Claire remained warm but cautious, recalibrating. Jenna drifted. Mary felt the loss more sharply than she'd expected, and also with a strange certainty that it was the cost she owed. In a meeting that afternoon, Marcus made an offhand remark while presenting, something about long-term commitments slowing innovation. The room chuckled lightly. Mary felt it again. That old itch. The reflexive laugh at the edge of her lips. She didn't laugh. Instead, she raised her hand. Actually, she said calmly, long-term commitments are often what allow risk. Stability gives room to experiment. The room quieted. Marcus stared at her. Their supervisor nodded slowly. That's a good point, Mary. The meeting moved on. Mary's pulse raced long after. She didn't feel victorious. She felt present. After work, Claire caught up with her at the elevator. Hey, she said, can I ask you something? Mary nodded. Are you mad at us? Mary considered. No, I'm mad at myself for not being clearer sooner. But I don't want to keep building friendships where I disappear. Claire absorbed that. That wasn't my intention. I know. They rode down in silence. David's a good guy, Claire said after a moment. I see that now. Mary smiled, not reflexively, but warmly. He is. That night, David came over for dinner. Not to stay, just to eat. It was tentative, polite, real. Mary didn't over-explain. She didn't promise. She told him about work, about choosing words, about letting some connections loosen. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded. That sounds hard. It is, she said honestly. But it feels right. He studied her. Not searching for enthusiasm or grand gestures, but watching for that steady alignment he'd named. I see effort, he said. Hope stirred, not relief, not absolution. Just the quiet beginning of something earned. After he left, Mary stood in the doorway for a long time. She finally understood that losing ease was not the same as losing herself, and that some laughter simply wasn't worth the echo it left behind. Chapter 4, The Work of Repair. David did not move back in on a dramatic note. There was no suitcase carried through the front door, no kiss that signaled resolution. He simply began staying later. One evening stretched into bedtime for Ellie, another into breakfast the next morning. The toothbrush appeared in its usual place without comment. Mary noticed everything. She noticed how he asked before assuming, do you want me to make coffee? As if the house had become shared territory again, not automatic. She noticed how he laughed with Ellie easily but went quiet when Mary reached for him without warning. Not rejecting her, but recalibrating. Distance with intention. They sat at the kitchen table late one night, paperwork spread between them. Insurance statements, a permission slip Ellie needed signed, the completely unromantic scaffolding of shared life. David leaned back in his chair. I don't want to fight, he said plainly. But I don't want to just move on. Mary nodded. I don't want you to. He studied her for a moment. What do you think happened? She didn't answer immediately. She'd asked herself this question a dozen times and rejected the first 9 answers each time. I think, she said slowly, I got comfortable letting the loudest room decide who I was being. David's eyes stayed on her, attentive. I told myself I could be different versions of myself depending on context, she continued. I thought that was flexibility, but somewhere along the way it became avoidance. I avoided being the version of me that might make people uncomfortable. And I was one of those people, he said quietly. Yes, she said. No flinch. No qualifier. And that's on me. He looked down at the papers, then back up. I don't need to be defended over every joke. I'm not fragile. I know, she said. That's what made it easier to ignore. Because I knew you'd take it. Mary, he said gently. That's not a kindness. She swallowed. I see that now. He considered this, then spoke again. I don't want apologies in advance, or promises you can't feel yet. I know. What I need, he said, is to see you choose me when it's subtle, when no one's watching, when it would be easier not to. Mary folded her hands together. I'm practicing that. He smiled faintly at the word practicing. Good, he said, because this isn't a switch. They didn't resolve anything that night. They cleaned up the kitchen. He brushed his teeth. He slept beside her without touching her. Mary lay awake long after, resisting the urge to narrate her effort, resisting the instinct to speed things up with performance. She focused instead on remembering what steadiness felt like when no one was applauding. A week later, She declined an invitation she would have automatically accepted before. Jenna stopped by her desk just before 5. "We're grabbing drinks. You in?" Mary glanced at her screen, then up at Jenna. "No." Jenna blinked. "Oh. You sick?" "No," Mary said. "Just home inclined." "That's new," Jenna said, half smiling. "Yes," Mary agreed. "It is." At home, David was helping Ellie with a puzzle on the living room floor. He looked up as Mary kicked off her shoes. "Hey," he said warmly. Mary felt the warmth land instead of slide off. She joined them on the floor, fitting pieces together. Ellie crowed with triumph when the picture finally locked into place. "Teamwork," David said. Mary smiled, not wide, not flashy. "True." That night, they talked about counseling. "I don't think we're broken," Mary said. "But I think we could use help staying honest." David nodded. "I already started looking." The fact that he'd done it quietly mattered. The hardest work came in places no one congratulated her for. At another family dinner, her cousin teased David lightly about being predictable. Mary felt the old reflex flare, deflect, joke, smooth. Instead, she said calmly, "Predictable isn't a flaw. It's how people feel safe." The table paused, then moved on. No drama, no applause. David met her eyes across the table. Not grateful, not relieved. Noted. Later, in the car, he said, "You didn't look at me when you said that." Mary smiled. "I wasn't doing it for reassurance." His mouth curved. "I noticed." There were moments she failed quietly. Times she laughed too fast, then caught herself too late. Times she stayed silent and realized afterward that silence had been its own kind of agreement. When she named those moments to David without defensiveness, without begging forgiveness, something steadied between them. They weren't rebuilding passion yet. They were rebuilding trust's muscle memory. One night, as they brushed their teeth side by side, David caught her reflection studying him. "What?" he asked. "I miss you," she said. His expression softened but didn't collapse. "I'm still here." She nodded. "I know. I'm making my way to you." He rinsed his mouth, thoughtful. "Keep walking." And for the first time since the cookout, when he reached for her hand before bed, she felt the gesture meet her instead of testing her. The work was ongoing, but it was real. And for the first time, Mary understood that love wasn't proven by endurance. It was proven by alignment, again and again, especially when no one was looking. Chapter 5, Being Uncomfortable on Purpose. Mary learned quickly that growth didn't announce itself with confidence. It arrived as a series of small refusals, quiet, awkward, unsatisfying moments where she chose friction over ease and walked away feeling unsparkling but intact. The first real test came sooner than she expected. Her Aunt Linda hosted a birthday dinner for one of Mary's cousins on Friday night, the kind of gathering that required folding chairs and mismatched place settings and grace under fluorescent lighting. Mary offered to bring a salad. David offered to grill. No one commented on how ordinary this sounded, and that felt like progress. They arrived separately, partly because of Ellie's gymnastics class, partly because neither of them was rushing symbolism. David was already outside when Mary pulled up, apron tied, speaking with her uncle about propane tanks. He looked comfortable, not guarded, not performative, just present. Mary exhaled and joined the crowd. Dinner unfolded with the usual cadence. Plates passed, drinks refilled, the gentle theater of family dynamics replayed with minor updates. Mary sat beside David, their knees barely touching. She resisted the urge to reach for his hand just because people were watching. Conversation drifted, as it always did, toward life trajectories. "So," Aunt Linda said, slicing into cake, "any plans to shake things up, Mary? You've got the stable job, the kid, the house. All very settled." There it was. Mary felt a familiar prickle, the moment where self-deprecation or humor could smooth everything over. She could joke about boredom, about chaos, about the fantasy of something more. She could win laughs effortlessly. She had done it before. She glanced at David, not for permission, not for reassurance, but to register his presence. Then she turned back to her aunt. "I like my life," she said simply. The table blinked. "No ambition?" her cousin joked. Mary smiled, small and steady. "Plenty. Just not the kind you perform." Silence lingered, not hostile, just unused. David continued eating, utterly calm. Later, in the car, he kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the console. "That was new," he said. "It felt clumsy," Mary admitted. He smiled faintly. "Clumsy beats hollow." She nodded. The next discomfort came without witnesses. On Tuesday afternoon, Jenna stopped by Mary's desk again, spinning her chair backward to perch on it casually. "Marcus is throwing a thing," she said. "Low-key. You should come." Mary looked up slowly. "Just me? Or David too?" Jenna hesitated. "Well, probably just you. It's more of a social crowd." Mary waited. Jenna added, lighter now, "You deserve space to just be you." Mary closed her laptop. She didn't feel angry. She felt something sadder, recognition. "I am me," she said. "All the time." Jenna laughed awkwardly. "You know what I mean." "I do," Mary replied. And I'm not interested. Jenna studied her, expression searching. You've really changed. Mary considered that. I think I stopped editing. Jenna scoffed gently. That sounds exhausting. Mary smiled, but didn't soften the truth. It's actually quieter. They didn't finish the conversation. Jenna left with a shrug that tried to look casual and failed. Mary sat back, heart thudding. Not triumphant, not even relieved. Just aligned. The counselor's office smelled faintly like eucalyptus and books. They sat side by side on a couch that was too soft, knees nearly touching. The therapist, a woman with kind eyes and no interest in rushing, asked them to talk about the cookout. David spoke first. I didn't feel angry, he said. I felt invisible. Mary inhaled slowly. She didn't interrupt. I didn't want to yell, he continued. I wanted to leave before I became someone I didn't respect. The therapist turned to Mary. What did you notice hearing that? Mary's voice was steady, even as her chest tightened. That he protected himself instead of punishing me, and that I forced him into that position. David glanced at her, surprised. The therapist nodded. Mary, what do you think you lost that afternoon? Mary swallowed. Authority. Over myself. That landed. Over the next session, and the one after that, truth stacked carefully between them. Not accusations. Not defenses. Just naming. David named his fear of being slowly sidelined in his own marriage. Mary named her fear of being reduced, to wife, to mother, without room for her voice. What voice? David asked gently once. The one you like? Or the one that disappears? Mary had to sit with that. Their intimacy returned sideways. Not in grand declarations or rekindled passion, but in shared logistics and mutual regard. They laughed over burnt pancakes. They argued over which movie to watch and resolved it without bitterness. They brushed their teeth together again without it feeling ceremonial. One night, after Ellie fell asleep sprawled diagonally across her bed, David joined Mary on the couch. You don't reach for me as much, he observed. Mary folded her legs beneath her. I didn't want to reach out of guilt. He nodded. Thank you. She met his eyes. I want you. I just don't want to use wanting you as proof I've changed. A slow smile curved his mouth. That might be the sexiest thing you've ever said. She laughed, herself laughing, not reaching for approval. The sound echoed warmly in the room. The final test of the week came unexpectedly. Marcus cornered her in the break room mid-morning, leaning against the counter with that same casual confidence she now recognized as a shield. You really iced me out, he said lightly. Mary poured her coffee without looking at him. I didn't ice you out. I stopped playing along. He smiled. You know, I never meant anything by those jokes. I know, she said, meeting his eyes now. But I did. And so did my husband. Marcus tilted his head. So this is about him. No, Mary said calmly. This is about me deciding what kind of woman I am in rooms you'll never enter. That stopped him. He straightened, recalculating. Fair enough. She nodded. I think so. He left without another word. Mary leaned against the counter and let herself feel the tremor pass. Not fear. Aftershock. That night, she told David what happened. He listened, eyes steady on her face. That couldn't have been easy, he said. It wasn't, she admitted. But it wasn't dramatic either. It just ended. David nodded. Endings like that usually stick. She hesitated, then asked the question that had lodged itself quietly in her chest. Are you coming home to stay? He didn't answer immediately. I already am, he said finally. But fully? That depends on whether this keeps happening. Mary met his gaze, resolute. It will, even when it costs me. He leaned forward and kissed her. Not desperate, not urgent, intentional. For the first time since the afternoon that changed everything, Mary didn't wonder who she was becoming. She recognized herself. And this time, she stayed. Chapter 6. When the mask slips, Mary didn't plan the confrontation. It arrived the way most turning points did, unannounced, inconvenient, and impossible to ignore. The quarterly review meeting ran long. People lingered afterward, gathering their things slowly, rehashing slides without urgency. Mary waited near the door, mentally assembling her evening. Ellie's spelling words, pasta water already boiling in her head. Marcus's voice cut across the room. Well, he said, stretching. Some of us thrive on momentum. Others prefer maintenance mode. A few people chuckled. Not much. Enough. Mary felt it. The old instinct to pretend she hadn't heard, to file it away as harmless commentary, to preserve the atmosphere rather than her integrity. But something had shifted since the cookout, since the quiet work of repair. Silence didn't feel neutral anymore. Felt like a decision. She turned around. Marcus, she said, level and clear. He looked surprised, not alarmed, not defensive. Just caught. Yes. Mary met his eyes. If you're talking about me, say it directly. The room stilled in that subtle way that meant people were pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. Marcus smiled thinly. I didn't name names. You didn't have to, Mary replied. You've been circling the same idea for weeks. I'm done interpreting it quietly. Someone shifted a chair. Someone else coughed. This isn't personal, Marcus said lightly. Mary tilted her head. It is when you make it about who I am instead of the work I do. He opened his mouth, then closed it, recalculating. I don't need you to like my choices, she continued. But I won't entertain commentary that assumes they make me smaller or slower or irrelevant. The air felt electric, not tense but charged with consequence. Marcus straightened, his casual posture slipping. Fair enough, he said, tone clipped now. I'll keep it focused on deliverables. That's all I'm asking, Mary said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't apologize for discomfort. She didn't soften the ending. She picked up her bag and left the room with her heart racing, and her spine intact. At home, the energy took longer to settle. Mary stirred sauce with more force than necessary, replaying the exchange in her head. Not for cleverness, not for victory, checking honestly whether she'd crossed a line. David noticed immediately. You look like someone who had a day, he said, setting his keys down. She glanced up. I stood up for myself. His eyebrows lifted. Tell me. She told him exactly what she'd said. Exactly how it had landed. She didn't embellish. She didn't frame herself as braver than she'd felt. When she finished, David leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, not guarded, just listening. How do you feel? He asked. Mary considered. Shaky, relieved, proud, a little sad. For what? That it took me this long, she said. David nodded. Growth usually charges interest. She laughed softly. That's unfairly accurate. He studied her for a moment, then stepped closer. I want to tell you something, he said. She turned off the stove and faced him fully. When I left that day, he said, I wasn't wondering whether you loved me. I knew you did. Her chest tightened. I was wondering whether you knew who you were becoming, he continued. Because if you didn't, I knew we'd keep having versions of the same moment. Mary let his words settle. And now, I see you choosing, he said, even when it costs you comfort, even when no one's grading the effort. She exhaled, a long, grounding breath. I don't want to be brave only when watched. That's the difference, he said simply. He reached for her then, not cautiously, not tentatively, intentionally, his hand at her waist, hers resting against his chest. The contact felt earned. The ripple effects came quickly. Marcus kept his distance after that. Professional, neutral, clean. Claire invited Mary to lunch the next day, just the two of them. Jenna thinks you've gone very serious, Claire said, half smiling. Mary stirred her soup. I am serious about my life. Claire studied her. You seem settled. Mary smiled. Grounded. That's a good look on you, Claire said, and meant it. Some relationships adjusted. Some dissolved. Mary let them do what they needed without chasing resolution. At home, David slipped fully back into rhythms that felt natural again. Shared jokes, shared decisions, shared silence. One night, after Ellie fell asleep mid-sentence during a story, David closed her door quietly and leaned against the hallway wall. You okay? He asked Mary. She nodded. Tired. In a good way. He smiled. That's usually when truth sticks. They went to bed together without ceremony, without the need to prove anything. When David kissed her, it wasn't reclaiming. It was choosing. Later, wrapped in the quiet dark, Mary stared at the ceiling and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Stability without stagnation. Identity without performance. She hadn't lost herself by committing. She had nearly lost herself by forgetting why she had. And now, finally, she was standing where her feet were, no longer auditioning for rooms that didn't require her absence. The mask had slipped, and she hadn't reached to put it back on. Chapter 7. Relearning each other. Mary hadn't realized how much of their marriage had once run on shorthand. A look across a room. A joke finished mid-sentence. The assumption that understanding would arrive faster than explanation because it always had. Now, without that shorthand, everything slowed. Strangely, it made things sweeter. Saturday morning arrived without alarms. Ellie woke them by climbing into bed like a determined cat, wedging herself between them and declaring hunger with theatrical urgency. Dayawad, she groaned. Mommy takes too long to wake up. Mary cracked one eye open. Betrayal already? David smiled sleepily. She's efficient. Breakfast became pancakes slightly too thick and eggs slightly too dark, eaten at the table instead of carried elsewhere. Ellie narrated every bite as if documenting a wildlife documentary. And here, she said solemnly, holding up her fork, we see the syrup migrating. David laughed. Mary caught the sound and felt it in her chest. Unforced, familiar. Later, while Ellie colored at the coffee table, Mary and David stood at the sink together, washing dishes. I've been thinking, David said. Mary tensed reflexively, then softened it. Okay. I don't want us to rush back to normal, he said. I don't think normal was actually working. She nodded. I agree. He glanced at her. I don't need dramatic proof. I need us to keep choosing curiosity over assumption. Relief wasn't the right word. Reassurance, maybe, tempered with responsibility. I can do that, she said. I know, he replied. It struck her then how different that sounded from I believe you. Later that afternoon, they walked Ellie to the little park down the street. She raced toward the swings while Mary and David followed at a measured pace. You okay walking like this? David asked lightly. Not holding hands? Mary smiled. I like that we're not reaching to prove anything. He nodded. Me too. Ellie demanded pushing. Then higher again. You're going to launch me to space, she giggled. David pretended to wipe sweat from his brow. If that happens, I want credit. Mary watched them, thinking about how often she treated steadiness like a given instead of a gift. That evening, when Ellie fell asleep curled around a stuffed rabbit, Mary and David sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, habit more than hesitation. They talked about inconsequential things. A neighbor's new car, a movie trailer, the strange way time seemed to behave lately. Eventually, David reached for her without ceremony, fingers brushing her wrist. Mary didn't flinch. She didn't surge forward either. She let the contact settle, real and unadorned. He smiled when she turned her hand to meet his. They began dating each other again, not in obvious ways but in attentive ones. Mary left notes in his lunch bag that weren't apologies or affirmations. Just small truths she didn't want to assume he already knew. I admire the way you show up tired but kind. Thank you for staying curious with me. David started texting her photos during the day. Ellie's abandoned sneakers by the door. A sky that looked too dramatic to ignore. Thought you'd like this. She always did. They laughed more often, briefly, honestly, usually alone. Humor returned without performance, the kind that didn't scan the room for approval. One evening, as they folded laundry together, David held up a tiny sock, shaking his head. She's already outgrowing these. Mary smiled. She's always outgrowing something. He glanced at her. So are we. The words hung there, not heavy, not fragile. Yeah, she said. I think that's okay. The closest thing to fear returned when Mary least expected it. An email popped up from Jenna one Thursday afternoon. Hey, drinks tonight? Just us? Mary stared at the screen, pulse quickening. Not because she wanted to go, but because she recognized the temptation to negotiate herself into smaller truths. She imagined laughing lightly, dodging questions, performing ease for comfort. She pictured coming home afterward, feeling misaligned but not quite sure why. Instead, she typed, I can't tonight, but I hope you're doing well. There was a pause. You've really changed, Jenna replied. Mary sat back, breathing evenly. I've clarified, she typed. No reply followed. That night, she told David while they brushed their teeth. He listened, spitting foam into the sink. How do you feel? Sad, she admitted. And calm. Both can coexist, he said. She smiled at that, small gratitude blooming. The shift showed itself again at a work function a week later. Mary attended with David and Ellie, openly, unapologetically. She didn't hover by him. She didn't monitor conversations. She simply moved through the space as herself. When a colleague made a casual remark about trading stability for excitement, Mary didn't correct him publicly. She said later, neutrally, some of us found excitement in choosing well. David caught the exchange from across the room. When they drove home, Ellie asleep in the back seat, he reached over and threaded his fingers through hers. You didn't look at me that time either, he said softly. Mary smiled into the windshield. I'm learning. That, he said, squeezing her hand, is what made me come back fully. The words landed without fanfare and without fear. On a quiet Sunday night, long after the house had settled, Mary lay awake beside David, listening to the familiar cadence of his breathing. Can I ask you something? She whispered. He hummed. Always. Were you ever close to leaving for good? A pause. Honest. Careful. Yes, he said. Not because I stopped loving you, because I wasn't sure loving me mattered anymore. Her chest tightened. Not with guilt this time, but with clarity. It does, she said. And it always will, even when I'm afraid. He turned toward her then, pressing his forehead to hers. Fear isn't the enemy, he murmured. Disappearance is. She closed her eyes. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They lay there, awake together, not rushing the future or arguing with the past, simply choosing the present. Again. And this time, neither of them looked away. Chapter 8. Words that stick. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, understated and inevitable. Mary stood at the kitchen counter opening mail when she saw her mother's handwriting. Loops firm, purposeful, unmistakably hers. Inside was an invitation to a late spring neighborhood block party, the kind Mary's parents hosted every few years when they decided the world needed feeding. Food trucks, lawn games, neighbors, family. Should we go? Mary asked that night, holding the card between them. David read it once, then again, not for details but for subtext. He'd learned, as she had, that events were rarely about logistics anymore. Yes, he said finally. If you want to. Mary studied him. I do. And she meant it without performing courage into the answer. The Saturday of the party dawned bright and uncooperative, the sun determined to comment on everything. Mary chose her outfit deliberately, Not to impress, not to hide. Comfortable dress, flat sandals, hair pulled back without effort. David wore jeans and a button-down, sleeves rolled the way Mary always liked. They didn't discuss strategy. Ellie zigzagged down the sidewalk when they arrived, already friends with everyone and no one. Laughter floated across the lawn. Smoke curled from multiple grills. Music played softly enough to invite instead of overwhelm. Mary felt the old awareness pull at her. Not anxiety but attentiveness. The difference mattered. She introduced David without flourish, without apology. "This is my husband," she said simply. Not "this is David," hoping the word husband wouldn't hang awkwardly. Not "you've met David," as if context softened commitment. Just fact. People nodded, smiled, accepted. They split naturally. David helping her father with tables, Mary chatting with neighbors, moving in and out of each other's orbit without losing orientation. At one point, Marcus appeared at the edge of the gathering, invited by a mutual acquaintance Mary hadn't anticipated. Her pulse jumped. Not fear, not anger. Awareness. He spotted her, hesitated, then approached. "Mary," he said, neutral, professional. "Marcus," she replied. A beat passed where the old version of her might have filled the space. Joked, smoothed, performed. Instead, she allowed it to stay quiet. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. She nodded. "Neither did I." Her tone wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It was accurate. He glanced over her shoulder toward David, who was laughing with her uncle, hands moving easily as he spoke. "You look good," Marcus said, as if testing the word. "I am," Mary replied. Then, with a polite nod, she excused herself and walked away, heart steady, steps unhurried. David caught her eye across the yard, eyebrow lifting in question. She smiled, not seeking validation, just sharing information. Handled. He smiled back. Later, a moment echoed itself. A neighbor Mary barely knew joked, lightly and without malice. "You seem very settled for someone your age. Ever get restless?" The words landed softer than before. Practice dulled the sting. Mary didn't rush her answer. "I get curious," she said. "But I don't confuse that with dissatisfaction." The neighbor shrugged, smile easy. "Fair enough." No pin drop silence this time. Just life moving forward. David didn't hear the exchange. But he didn't need to. Mary felt something settle anyway. At dusk, her mother found her near the drinks table. "You seem different," she said, handing Mary a lemonade. Mary smiled faintly. "I feel clearer." Her mother studied her, then nodded once. Good. They didn't revisit the slap. They didn't need to. Some lessons didn't require reenactment. On the walk home, Ellie skipped ahead, narrating the evening with dramatic flair. "And then Daddy won the corn toss, and Mommy didn't laugh too loud, and I had 2 cookies. Mary laughed, this time freely. David glanced sideways at her. "You didn't laugh too loud?" Ellie turned around, scandalized. "That's what Grandma said makes people feel weird." Mary groaned. "Your grandmother has too many opinions." David smiled, squeezing Mary's hand. Once home, with Ellie tucked in and the house quiet again, Mary sat on the edge of the bed, peeling off her sandals. David leaned against the doorway, watching her with that familiar attentiveness, a habit restored, not anxious but appreciative. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so," she said. "Tired. But done." "With what?" "With pretending alignment would come from intention alone," she said. "It doesn't. It comes from repetition." David crossed the room and sat beside her. "You know," he said, "when I left that afternoon, part of me thought I'd come back once you convinced me." Mary swallowed. "I'm glad that's not what happened." "So am I," he agreed. "You didn't convince me. You showed me." They sat quietly. Mary reached for his hand this time, not to prove anything, not to repair something cracked, but because she wanted to feel it. He laced his fingers with hers, easy. "I'm not afraid of disapproval anymore," she said softly. "At least, not the way I was." "What changed?" he asked. "I realized that fitting in was costing me fluency in myself," she replied. "And I like who I am when I don't translate her away." David leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. "Those are words that stick," he murmured. She smiled. "I'm learning to speak them out loud." They kissed then, not urgent, not dramatic. Familiar and renewed, the way something feels when it hasn't been replaced, only strengthened. Weeks later, life resumed its ordinary strange beauty. Work stabilized. Some connections faded. Others deepened. Mary didn't chase replacements. She built consistency instead. One afternoon, Claire stopped by Mary's desk with a smile that held no questions. "You've got good energy lately," she said. Mary looked up. "Aligned energy." Claire laughed. "Figures." At home, David no longer hesitated at doorways, no longer watched for signs with guarded eyes. Trust returned gradually, then naturally, like muscle memory restored through use. One evening, as they cleaned the kitchen together, Ellie stormed in dramatically. "I told my friend Emma that my parents fix things when they mess up," she announced. Mary froze. David crouched to Ellie's level. "Did you?" Ellie nodded. "Because Emma's parents only yell." Mary's throat tightened. David smiled gently. We don't always fix things perfectly, but we try. Ellie considered this. That's better. She ran off again. Mary leaned against the counter, breathing through the unexpected weight of it. That mattered, David said quietly. Yes, Mary replied. It really did. That night, lying side by side, David turned to her with a small, thoughtful smile. You know, he said, I never needed a perfect wife. Mary smiled back. Good, because I retired her. He laughed, then softened. I needed a present one. She met his gaze steadily. I'm here. He nodded, satisfaction settling deep rather than flaring bright. The marriage hadn't been saved by apologies or clever speeches. It hadn't been redeemed by endurance alone. It had been restored one quiet choice at a time, by words that no longer floated ahead of action, but walked beside it. And Mary, rooted finally in herself, no longer confused belonging with disappearing. She belonged, and this time she stayed.